Welcome into our Hear Me, See Me podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Bruner. Hear Me, See Me is a mental health awareness initiative of all of us at WIBW TV. So glad you can be along to join our conversations because today's topic really reinforces that adage that mental health is health. We see so much about our physical health, but our mental health is something we need to pay attention to as well. Mikki Burcher is with Vallejo Behavioral Health in Topeka. She actually teaches something called mental health first aid, which is such a great name for it, first of all, because, we always think about we need to take a first aid course, and we think physical, the compressions, the doing it to the staying alive pace and all of that. Mental health is something we need to pay attention to and know how to respond to as well.
Absolutely. And you kind of stole my explanation in the best possible way, because when people ask me what mental health first aid is, I frequently do use the example of CPR, or when someone gets hurt, we kind of know we need to tie off, the leg if somebody's bleeding, and we know these kind of basics. But do we know what to do if we think our coworker might be struggling with some kind of mental health challenge? If our friend or family member is exhibiting some signs or symptoms we're concerned about, do we know how to approach them? Do we know what to do? And that's exactly what mental health first aid teaches.
Does this go to the root of, is there a difference between knowing these skills for mental health struggles versus mental illness issues?
So in mental health first aid, we like to say that we use the term mental health challenge. And we do that intentionally because it covers the spectrum from someone who's just first exhibiting signs and symptoms, and maybe their overall mental health challenge is something that they can end up coping with on their own. And it covers that spectrum all the way through to a mental health diagnosis or even a mental health crisis. So we use the phrase mental health challenge within the parameters of the course to kind of talk about just a mental health challenge broadly, because it is a spectrum, right? It goes from something that's maybe manageable solo or with a little bit of extra help from friends and family, all the way to needing that professional support. So there's a whole spectrum there, and we talk about all of it.
I think that's one of the things that we need to talk more about in terms of just a mental health challenge or struggle. Doesn't mean there's something wrong with you per se. I think nobody wants to be ill, quote unquote. Nobody wants to have a sickness. But when they hear us talk about mental health and mental health awareness, they're like, oh, you're going to tell me that I've got something wrong with me. But mental health is health. Everybody has a challenge or a struggle from time to time. How do you make people see that and realize that that's really part of what we're talking about? And dealing with them when they're a challenge can keep them from becoming a crisis or an illness.
Right. So what we kind of try to do is we tweak our language a lot in mental health first aid, because the words that we use to describe things are important. And so sometimes we do use the phrase mental health challenge instead of necessarily mental illness, because it doesn't encompass necessarily having a diagnosis. And we all know this is a perfect time of year to talk about this, because most people are going to be a little stressed around the holidays for one reason or another. And if that stress gets to be a little unmanageable for you, that's a mental health challenge. But that doesn't mean that you necessarily are falling into that spectrum on the end of having a crisis or needing any kind of diagnostic help. Another thing that we do is we'd like to talk about mental well-being. So mental health, again, it's on a spectrum. We can have really positive mental health where we're fully functioning, we're engaging in day-to-day life, we're finding purpose, and we have valuable relationships. But we can also be on the other end of that spectrum where we are having the mental health challenge. And so really just explaining to people that when we talk about mental health, it is a spectrum, and you can be anywhere on that spectrum, and you can move along that spectrum. You're not stuck in one place. We can work to improve our mental well-being more towards the positive end of things, where we are having a fuller life experience. And just because we're maybe on the lower end of that spectrum right now doesn't mean that we can't recover. And that's another huge part of mental health first aid, is focusing on recovery, whether that's from a mental health challenge that's more on the beginning side, or all the way on the other end of the spectrum on the crisis side.
What you just said about words mattering, it just kind of hit me, because just think about how that flips the script right there. If you ask someone, are you having a mental health challenge right now? Automatically that sounds so negative. But if I ask you, how is your mental health well-being? That almost sounds, just automatically spins it in a more positive light. And by the way, when we talk about this spectrum, if you are hearing something that makes you really feel like you're in kind of that crisis mode, the 988 Lifeline is there 24/7 for you if you feel like you need to pick up that phone and talk to somebody right now. Vallejo also has a crisis center if you feel like you need to see someone in person. Mental health first aid though, Mikki, why are these important skills for everyone to have?
So I think that since the pandemic, there's been a bigger focus on mental health in general, but we're still struggling with some stigma around mental health. And people, there's a couple things that can happen. Someone might not even know where to go for help if they need help. Someone might not have access, or they might not even know that they need help. And people just don't talk about it as much as I would like to see. I want this to just be a casual conversation that people can have, but there is still some stigma and some other barriers. And so when we train individuals to kind of be on the lookout, so mental health first aid, one of the things we say frequently is our job is to be an observer. And when we train people to be on the lookout for those signs and symptoms, we're able to catch people in that beginning stage of their mental health challenge, hopefully get them connected to the resources that they need right away, so it never has a chance to progress on that spectrum to needing more resources and more help. So when we have mental health first aid out there and we're training people, the idea is that we're catching these mental health challenges at the beginning because more people are trained on what to look out for in the first place.
And let's face it, we all have minds, we all have brains. There are people struggling all around us, and it can be difficult to start that conversation. So when you think about how you're walking people through the mental health first aid course, what's the first thing you cover? Is it starting the conversation? Is it looking for signs and symptoms? Where do you start?
Well, so
we'll start there too.
It's actually more about what is our actual role. And the fact that we don't diagnose or treat is a big motto here in mental health first aid. So we talk about what are we capable of doing as individuals first so that we don't jump into situations that we are uncomfortable with, not qualified for, and what can we do to help, and then how do we do that? And so usually, yes, the first kind of thing we start with after we talk about our role as a mental health first aider and ensuring safety for ourselves is what are we even looking for? Because some of them might seem more like super obvious. If someone may be suffering from hallucinations or delusions, those things tend to be very visible or audible. Like we just know that there might be something happening here that needs help. Some of them are less obvious. Mental health signs and symptoms, I talk spectrums a lot. We're gonna use that word a lot today, but signs and symptoms also exist on a spectrum. So if we think about sleeping, someone who's undersleeping or oversleeping are both signs or symptoms of potential mental health challenge. Same thing with working. People who look very successful, or maybe they're just really dedicated to their job, if that is a change from their normal behavior and they're suddenly overworking, that could also be a sign or symptom. So sometimes we don't even know what we're looking for if we haven't had the opportunity to really discuss what signs and symptoms are, and the fact that there is a spectrum, and that if we're getting on either extreme, it's bad, even the ones that might look more beneficial to the person, like working a lot. Working out a lot, same thing, if you're working out a ton, that could be a sign or symptom too. So it's really about helping people understand what to even be on the lookout for, and then what to do when we start to notice those signs or symptoms.
So the signs and symptoms, you mentioned a few things, the sleeping, a change in work habits. What other things might we look out for?
Yeah, so in the class we go over 4 kind of broad categories, and we talk about how people are thinking and how they're feeling. So those are things we have to listen for. I do a lot of hand motions during my classes, so I'm always like seeing and hearing. But how people are thinking and how they're feeling, those are things we have to listen for. So
what are we listening for?
Oh, things like, this is never gonna get better, or I'm never gonna get this right. I don't know why anybody even puts up with me. Those kinds of things that indicate that someone is having maybe low self-esteem. They're not feeling good about the way they're performing at their job, those kinds of things. We also might do notice a change in behavior. And a change in appearance. So those are the things that we see, things that we're observing with our eyes, things like showing up late, maybe some presenteeism where they're sitting in a meeting with us, but maybe not fully engaging in the meeting or seem kind of checked out. And changes in behavior would be things like someone who's normally very polished, being a little bit more unkempt than usual, or having, not grooming the same that they have in the past. So those are some of the things that we teach about in depth.
So that's one category. Are there others?
Those are the 4 categories.
Those are the 4 categories. So repeat them for me.
Okay, so changes in behavior and appearance. And then we also have how people are thinking and feeling. So we're looking for changes in those areas.
Okay, so once we do that, I'm kind of going backward now and asking you, how do you ascertain what your role would be if you notice some of those things?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about your relationship to the person. So how you know that person is going to determine kind of the way that you might approach, which is the first step of the algae action plan. We could talk about that.
Algae, like the stuff that grows?
Okay. Yeah, our 5-step plan in mental health first aid is called the algae action plan. We go over it in great detail in the course. Actually, it is a good half of the course is what is it and how do we implement it. But that first A is for assessing the situation, and then how do we approach and assist. And so your approach is going to depend a lot on how you know that person. So if it's a family member, a friend, someone you know well, your approach is going to look different than if it's maybe a brand new coworker who's only been at your place of employment for a month or a week, right? So the approach really is all about how do we just open up a conversation and let that person know that we are a safe person that they can talk to and can actually provide help. And it's hard because there's not like a script, right? A lot of it is, again, based on how do you know them, how well do you know them, and what have we actually observed. But sometimes it's as easy as just like, hey, Melissa, I noticed that you've been late to a couple of meetings this week, and you missed out on our lunch that we were supposed to have on Thursday. Are you feeling okay? Something just as casual as that. It's really good to use I language. I've noticed this instead of like, hey, you ditched me, Melissa. No, saying like, hey, I noticed this. Are you feeling all right? So, and again, that'll vary depending on the severity of the signs or symptoms we're noticing, the relationship we have. But we go into a lot of depth and role playing about how do we actually reach out to people.
I would imagine sometimes the role is going to be different depending on what your own skill set is that you recognize about yourself. And sometimes, is it really going to come down to you don't have a role? If there is clear and present danger, imminent danger to self or others, then your role is going to be call 911.
Absolutely. So there are certain phrases that happen during the course that I'm sure my learners get very frustrated with me, but I'm always like, safety first, safety, safety, safety. Your safety, their safety, the safety of those around you. And sometimes, yes, especially if we're in a crisis state and someone is very escalated, you may not feel comfortable, even as a mental health first aider with your training, dealing with the situation. That is okay. We don't ever want people to deal with something that they don't feel comfortable or safe dealing with. Being a mental health first aider is a tool in your toolbox to provide help. It does not mean that you have to help if the situation is unsafe.
And it's a good time to point out that we're so fortunate in Topeka because we actually have the crisis intervention teams and the crisis response teams that go out on these types of calls. So you're not calling 911 and thinking, well, gosh, a police officer, is that really what I want to do to this person? You're getting a professional to a person when these crisis calls come in.
Absolutely. And just some tips if we are having to call 911, because CIT is wonderful, they're not always available. If we are thinking that there's some mental health challenge that's present, it's always good to tell the operator that so that the police understand what they're walking into, or the emergency professionals, whoever they may be, so that they kind of understand what's going on before they get there. And it's really helpful if you can describe the things that you're seeing. And what I think is the hardest part is to not diagnose, because mental health language is very prevalent now, but we don't actually know what's going on with someone. So if we see someone talking to themselves or talking to an inanimate object, it's better to tell the operator, this individual seems to be talking to thin air, this individual is talking to a tree, instead of saying, oh, this person's schizophrenic or this person's in psychosis, because we don't actually know that as mental health first aiders. Most people in the general public aren't going to know that. So just describe what you're seeing instead of trying to put a label on it.
Okay, so we've assessed and approached. I like this algae. I like to go through these letters. I like algae. I like algae. No, I like acronyms.
Yes.
So we've assessed and approached. What's the L?
Listening.
Okay.
Yeah, listening non-judgmentally. So again, maintaining that safe place for people so that they know that we are going to hear what they're saying. And a huge part of listening is just really holding space for that person and remembering what they tell us, and then really hearing them. So again, the non-judgmental part is critical. We're going to keep our face pretty expressionless if we can, especially if someone's trusting us with something kind of severe. You'll want to have a reaction because you're human, but we try really hard to kind of tamp that down and just hear people out. And then after we do our non-judgmental listening, we can kind of fact find, ask a few more questions so that we know the next best step forward.
G.
Which stands for giving reassurance and information. So during this step, we talk a lot about recovery, mental health challenges, and mental illness are things, there's a lot of misunderstandings around them. And we talk a lot, when someone like breaks their leg, right, we don't write it off as like, you're never gonna get better. Oh, you'll be back to it in no time, which is not always a great thing to say because we don't know that for sure, but that's what people tend to say is like, oh, it'll get better, right? We don't always remember to do that when we're talking about mental health. So that's really what this is about, is just emphasizing that it is possible to improve the situation. Recovery looks different for different people when it comes to mental health, but usually there are ways to improve the quality of life for pretty much most mental health challenges. So really talking about that, and then providing the information that they may need to make a decision about what their next step is. So giving information is not the same thing as giving advice. So we really try to refrain from telling people what they should do. We're not prescriptive, we provide options. And these are some options you may have. So that's what the G is.
Well, and I think that's important for some of those, I don't want to say minor, because I mean, everything is serious when you're in the midst of it, but I'm thinking about, you know, if it's at the time of year around the holidays where everybody is stressed out, the giving support might just be, you know, what can we do to help you, and then be prepared to give that help, I imagine is the follow-up on that. Don't just say, well, gosh, you're stressed right now. You've got X number of things going on. And I'm thinking in the workplace, if you're a colleague, you know, maybe you are in a position where you can help in terms of maybe taking this task off the plate or assisting with this, or have you thought about, you know, let's call this, or, but you have to be prepared to follow up and give that help then too, and not just say you're going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of to the point there about giving reassurance, the steps are all, it's not necessarily a linear process. We talk about how you choose which step is appropriate based on your listening. So sometimes just listening to someone is the reassurance and giving them a space to talk about what's going on. So sometimes that's all you really need, is just someone to hear you out. I mean, I'm like that sometimes for sure. Sometimes I just want to talk about a situation and then I feel better about it and I can let it go. So sometimes, yeah, giving reassurance is offering support and help, but sometimes listening is just the reassurance that they need and validating that what they're feeling is normal or okay. So yeah, definitely.
And the second A in ALGE.
So there we've got the ALGE.
Am I spelling it right?
It's actually ALGEE.
Oh.
So we're tripping it up. Yeah. So after our G, we have our two E's, which is encourage professional help, and then encourage self-help and support, alternative support strategies. So that's really about connecting to resources professionally, so explaining what may be available in the area. As a mental health first aider, we want to be a little bit knowledgeable about barriers to achieving treatment or getting help, and make sure that we maybe have some workarounds, or we have some places that we can offer to help with those barriers, to help smash those barriers down. And then if someone is unwilling or unable to get the professional help right away, which often is the case, then we go ahead and we encourage some self-support. So that might be things like what they can realistically engage in to improve their own mental well-being, which we loosely call self-care, but self-care is not always the best phrase, because in digital social media age invokes certain
candles
and certain aesthetic.
And books.
Yeah.
And hot cocoa.
Bubble baths. Yeah. Self-care looks like sleeping a right amount of time, and maybe getting outside and getting some sunlight if you're struggling to get outside, those kinds of things. So what can that person realistically do to improve their own mental well-being? And then also, if there's alternative strategies available. So is there a support group, maybe a 12-step group that could benefit them? Finding a grief group, maybe that is just run by like a church family or a different type of organization that wouldn't necessarily fall under that professional help category. So those are the two kind of end pieces, is how do we connect them with resources, whether that's professionally or something more community-based or something that they're going to be doing on their own.
And is that both of the E's together?
That's both the E's together,
okay,
yeah. So,
very good.
So professional support, and then the second one is self-help.
So we've gone through all of that, and you kind of mentioned, when we say, when we notice the signs and symptoms, and then what do we do? And that's all incorporated in the algae. But what is a barrier to doing something? What are some of the things that, especially as you go through the class and people say, well, gosh, I don't know if I can do that. What is it, our fear?
As a mental health, you mean like
as a mental health first
aider?
aider? Like, why don't we feel comfortable starting these conversations with people we know?
So sometimes I think it definitely could be fear about our own competency. Like, do I know how to help them? Because that's a really bad feeling when you're trying to help and then someone kind of shares something with you and you don't know what to do, or you don't know how to help. So we hold back because we think that we might not know how to help. I think another thing is just the stigma of it. Asking someone, like you said, that our language really matters. So if we are maybe unfamiliar with how to talk about mental health in general, and we go say to someone like, well, I think you're having a mental health challenge and let's talk about it, that's going to come off a lot different. So I think a lot of it is not having the language, not having the understanding of what to do, because there's a gap between just saying, hey, you know, are you feeling okay? I've noticed these things seem a little off. And then if someone actually does tell you something's wrong, do we know how to get them from A to B? Do we know what resources are available ourselves? So those are all the things that we go over so that people feel really equipped and like they have a really full toolbox to help people, so that opening up those conversations becomes easier because you know what resources are in your community, you know what types of treatments may be available, because people tend to ask you a lot of questions, and so you want to be a little knowledgeable about kind of where you're sending them and what types of things may happen, so you can ease some of those fears. And you just want to have, you know, kind of a plan in your head of this is how we get from here to here, and that's what this course provides.
I think sometimes people welcome the opportunity to vent too. When you're on the lower end of the mental health well-being, when your well-being isn't so well on a given day, you just want somebody to say, are you doing okay today? And then just the opportunity to vent, and that's where that listening comes in the algae. I think too, how do you prepare people for if the conversation and the question isn't very well received? And by that I mean you ask them, are you doing okay? And it devolves into kind of anger. The person expresses anger at you, and that might just be a factor of where the person is at in their own mental health well-being at that point in time.
Yeah. So sometimes it's anger, but also sometimes it's just like dismissal, and that may be because they don't think that there's anything wrong, and maybe there really isn't. Signs and symptoms can be tricky because if, let's say, someone shows up to work late a couple days a week and they look a little unkempt and tired and they've got bags under their eyes and we're concerned about them, well, what other things might be going on in their life besides a mental health challenge? You know, they could have a newborn, for example. They could have a child who's just been sick as well, not even a newborn, but like an older child who's been sick. So sometimes we are met with either bewilderment or anger or just kind of a dismissal. And really the key there is just maintaining a positive attitude and staying friendly and just being like, I'm so glad that you're doing well. I didn't mean anything by it. I just wanted to check in because depending on your relationship to the person, because I care about you, because you're important to the workplace, whatever that looks like, you know. And then just validating, if you ever need to talk about anything, I just want you to know I'm here as a resource, because people might not be ready for help today. That doesn't mean they won't be ready for help next week, next month, next year, and we want to keep the door open and let them know that we're a safe person to talk to.
Be honest, all of those things, having a newborn at home, having to be a caregiver for someone, all of those things impact our mental well-being.
Oh yeah, of course.
You know, it's the whole, I'm just stressed out. Well, that does impact how you're able to function.
Yeah.
And again, it's that awareness and acceptance that all of these things are impacting each other.
Yes.
So that's a whole 8-hour course we just summed up in 24 minutes. Good job, Mikki.
Yeah.
But when people are doing this more in-depth, what is a good setting? I know you offer them publicly, but what would be some advice to people out there in terms of if they're in a position to approach their workplace about bringing this in? How valuable is this information, and how easy is it to get a class like this? Because Vallejo in Topeka is this is something a lot of organizations are offering all across the country. I mean, I've seen some of our partners in Northeast Kansas, and when you think about the Emporia area, the Manhattan area, those organizations are offering it as well. So chances are, wherever you're watching or listening, there's somebody who can do this. So what do people need to do to reach out and get this kind of training for themselves, or maybe even, like I said, for their entire workplace or organization?
Yeah, so Mental Health First Aid is a global program. It was brought over to the United States shortly after it was actually created in Australia. So if you ever look at our website or anything, you'll see a little koala guy. His name's Algie, and that's why. But here in the United States, yeah, we have a huge presence. Mental Health First Aid does. In fact, in Kansas, I believe we have like 130-ish instructors in the state of Kansas.
Wow.
So yes, wherever you're at, you probably have an instructor near you. There's a couple of different ways to get those classes scheduled. So if you're local and you're looking for something in our area, of course you can email Vallejo. It's just MHFA, Mental Health First Aid, at vallejo-topeka.org, and that will go to a couple of us that help to run that program. And we can work with you to get something scheduled at your workplace. If you're not in our area, you can check out the Mental Health First Aid national website. So if you just Google Mental Health First Aid, it's the first one that pops up. And you can find local classes. There's also a contact form where you can reach out and indicate that you're interested in bringing something to your workplace. And they kind of send it out to the most local places around you that offer this kind of offer this course. So there's a lot of ways to do it, but here locally, probably your best bet is to reach out to us here at Vallejo, and we will get you hooked up. And if it's something that we have free classes for certain types of organizations, nonprofits, government entities, schools, we do also offer to businesses for a small fee, but compared to the total overall course value, we think that we offer it for a very reduced rate. So
why are you so passionate about this?
I am so passionate about it because a couple things. So I myself have a mental health diagnosis. I've tried to be very open about it because we're breaking those stigmas. I do have ADHD, and I also have OCPD, which is obsessive compulsive personality disorder. It is different than OCD. And I've also been very close to multiple people who have died by suicide. I lost my first love to suicide when I was quite young, and then I lost one of my best friends as well, all before I turned 30. So I just really want to take what I learned from my own experiences, what I learned from being friends with and loving people who have had some severe mental health challenges, and really just funnel that into helping people like me, because I didn't know what to do in those situations, and I want other people to know what to do so that they don't have to carry that burden of what could I have done differently, or I didn't know how to help, and all of that. So that's why I'm personally passionate about it. It's been very impactful on my life, and now I feel very confident when people are having a mental health challenge or crisis that I know what to do. And it's mostly because of this course.
It's skills that we all need to know, because you don't know who's struggling when you look around, and you know, you say look for signs and symptoms, and as you said, it's not always the obvious sign or symptom. And I know, we've experienced it in my own family, and having a conversation with my aunt after my cousin died by suicide earlier this year, and saying, do you mind if I ask you about it? Do you mind if I talk about my cousin? Her name was Heather. So she said, by all means, talk about it, because we have to talk about it,
right?
So that people know that we want them here tomorrow,
yes,
and that there is help out there. Again, we mentioned the 988 hotline at wibw.com/hearmesee.me. There's a whole list of organizations all around the area. There are national groups that are there to help, but sometimes it's the people that we're closest to who can just check in and say, you okay today?
Yeah.
And how are you today, Mikki, by the way?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm a little bit stressed, but all for good reasons. So I keep reminding myself that. I'm taking a trip at the end of the week I'm very excited about. And so just trying to cram all your work into a shortened work week.
And you know what I love about that answer is that you were honest about it.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't that rote, I'm fine, thanks, doing okay.
I'm having a great day. Yeah.
No, I'm preparing to have some time off, and let me tell you, there is a super long to-do list.
Yes.
And then something comes up in the morning and it throws me off. And so, but yeah, it's these conversations and being able to get that out. And now I feel better. Because you just heard me and I just heard you, and I'm like, you know what? It's a little stressful now, but just think of the reward at the end.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Mikki, thank you so very much. Mental health first aid skills we all should learn and know. Again, we have a whole bunch of resources on WIBW.com/hearmesee me. Also, if you are feeling something you heard today, if you're feeling that crisis, it's becoming overwhelming, 988 is there 24/7. And of course, the fine folks at Vallejo and the mental health organizations in your area are all here as well. Mikki, thank you so very much. Thank you for joining us as well. Remember, we hear you, we see you.